I'm Amy Ryan. I'm the director of the Office of Early Learning. You could have been anywhere today and you chose to be with us, so we appreciate that. With me today, I have Dan Tatro, who is our project manager in the Office of Early Learning. He's also going to be helping lead the presentation and answer questions, as well as Tanya Parrish, our current Read to Achieve section chief, who is going to be capturing our questions and answering some of your questions as well. And Kelly Bentheim, who is one of our lead consultants in the Northwest region. So we have someone who is out in the field living it with you every day and working to support you. So thanks for being here. Thank you for your patience as we have continued to work closely with our finance division to update PRC085 aligned to the new legislation that came out in April. Our goal today is to share the purpose of our PRC085 funds. There are three major uses of the funds aligned to the updated legislation, prioritizing district essentials this year compared to previous processes and resources as you plan the long-term science of reading sustainability. We plan to allow for time to answer questions. So we set this up as a webinar, but really the second half of this is more of an open time for for us to answer questions for you in the chat, using the chat today. So that's more of office hours combination of both. So I know there's individual needs and questions we want to make sure you have time to ask today. And then we are going to allow for that at the end of the session. And in case you haven't heard or you're new and you're not aware, the Excellent Public Schools Act legislation was updated and approved in April of 2021. And as a result, we worked with our finance division to update the PRC085 funds and the chart of accounts, which was approved in November to align to that new legislation. The chart of accounts was just recently updated, but the PRC policy was updated in November. The purpose of those funds is to provide literacy intervention funds for K-3 students aligned to SB 387 and General Statute 115C83. The funds are going to be used or should be used to support the science of reading professional development and implementation. So we're going to work from the bottom up on this particular slide because that's what came to you first. Item 3 was twice retained student tutoring funds. We did share a memo that clearly defined what twice retained students are, as well as an email from Tanya to our districts indicating your number of twice retained students. And this data is pulled from a script that's not always perfect. So we know there's a couple of times areas where we had to answer some questions to make sure those were accurate. But we're always happy to follow up those specific questions that you have when you're looking through your students to make sure we've identified the right students. If you're still working on some of that, please feel free to still reach out with those questions about individual cases, and we'll be happy to help you. But the general purpose is to ensure that those students who have been retained in grade 3 more than one time, including a reading retained student or that reading retained label for that second retention, they do receive tutoring outside of the school day. And so that is one of the legislative requirements. And these funds have been released, so you should have received those. Item 2, Science of Reading, that's the funds this year that were received only for cohorts 1 and 2 letters for those letters participants, because that relates to stipends and substitutes. The formula is $165 per attendee, a participant, per teacher per session. So if you think about it, it's one if for K-5 teachers, if all 4 of those were those 4 sessions were this year, then you would have 165 times 4 for those teachers that you would make sure that they had, and then or that you could use those funds for. And then if it was pre-K, it would have been 165 times 2. And so that's divided out per year. We recognize that next year, cohort 1 will do the next 4 units, and they'll we'll have those substitute stipends funds available there. An email was sent out to each of the districts in cohorts 1 and 2 with the total amount based on participants attending per session. And then so cohort 3 would not have received those funds yet because you didn't have the training this school year. That will come next year after July 1. So item 1, the literacy intervention plan funding focuses on everything else you might need to sustain the science of reading. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more in depth since that's fairly new. Every district will begin working on a literacy intervention plan to be submitted for feedback this year. Beginning in 22-23, however, these funds will be released once the plan is approved. So this year is kind of your practice year. You have a draft that you'll send in for submission. We'll provide feedback, but there are no funds tied to it or connected to it this year for the approval process. 22, 23, however, you'll have to submit those first for feedback, allow for time for the feedback, and then once they're approved, those funds will be released. And we'll work with finance on what that transition time looks like. Plans should be aligned to implementing the science of reading training, processes, and practices. Legislation considers reading camps as part of the district's intervention plan, so be sure to write those in there. While you'll still receive PRC016 funds, remember reading camps must still be aligned to science of reading. They're not necessarily something separate, just there is a separate pot of money for that. But they are aligned and should be included in the literacy intervention plan. So for this year, reading camp signing bonuses will be included as part of your 085 funds. So that's a part recruitment for for reading camp. Those funds come out of this year's PRC 085. However, performance bonuses would not come until after July 1, which is next year's funds. You'll receive those for next year. So make sure when you're writing your literacy intervention plans, it does ask that you put your reading camp recruitment plan in there for those signing bonuses, because you're going to be using those funds for that. Please note also that this is the last year that grade 1 is included in the reading camp funds that are allotted. With new legislation, we're still going to continue to support that this year, recognizing it's kind of a transition year. So you're welcome to include first grade. However, moving forward next year, it would only be second and third grade. So we want to kind of prepare you for that. The funds may be used for science of reading curriculum materials, for curriculum, decodable text, intervention support, and other aligned materials. Based on where we are with deployment in the state, one of the things I want to make sure that we talk about as well, though, is based on where we are, we need to start thinking about, so what are some options for sustainability for science of reading? With the deployment, we currently have your state contract, which is where we have contracted with Voyager Cypress, and we're using them for years 1 and 2 of your training. We're also, if you look at our current model, here's some other pieces that we're working on. We currently have 16 consultants who are being trained as well, and 4 of those are being fast-tracked so that we can pick up some of that training for makeups, for turnover, for sustainability at the state level. Those sessions and the dates for those trainings will be shared later this spring so that you have those in advance. And then down the road, once we have the funding allocated, we also received 6 positions or 7 positions for literacy coaches, regional literacy coaches, which you'll hear more about. We're still working on that process, but that's very similar to what Mississippi had done. So that's coming in the near future. However, along with that piece, one thing to consider is with your PRC 085 funds, a lot of times when we get these funds, we think of things, materials, core curriculum, intervention, and we just start spending the money to make sure we spend the money. What we would like for you to think about too is how can you build capacity with your staff rather than materials? How do you balance that? Because this is a chance to invest in your staff to make sure you're building their knowledge while you also purchase those materials with the funds that you do have. This model focuses on, as if I'm going to use these funds to work on local sustainability, then I could have some of my teachers or educators participating in state training, or I can use my funds to contract specifically with Voyager Cypress, with Lexia, and have some of my staff trained directly through Lexia, or I can have some of my staff, maybe my instructional coaches, a lead at the district, you identify those to become train the trainers through Lexia and make sure that you understand the requirements there. We're going to share more about what that process looks like. We have 7 districts who have moved ahead with identifying district lead facilitators and working on that process with Voyager Cypress. So we want to make sure that you know a little bit more about what that entails and what that requires. There are advantages to using your local staff because you can base that on your own calendars, your local calendars. But at the same time, if you're looking at funding and try to balance the funding and look at the prioritizing of your funds, you may not be at that place yet, and you still want to just look at the state options and what's available there. And then we'll do some of the same and use our consultants for the regional supports as well. So more to come with this, but we did want to be transparent in the fact that we do have one model that we're looking at that is a tiered support system that we'll be deploying and implementing. So this model is for K-5, and you see the current reality and what our goal is. And the next slide will show you the pre-K model, which is very similar. We want to make sure that we're including our pre-K partners and how we're going to support them as well. So based on where we are with deployment as a state and your local science of reading needs, you might find investing in building capacity with your people is a shift in funding priorities compared to what you've done in the past with purchases. As you're prioritizing those essentials, PRC085 can be used, as I'd said, to train letters, professional development for individuals not in the state contract. We've had lots of questions about what about our district staff or what about some reading specialists. This is your chance to also consider those funds to be used for contracting with those who weren't included in the legislation. And we have those sessions that we'll offer, as I mentioned earlier. And then the other thing that we talked about too is I mentioned the local facilitators and your options there. So as funds are being released, you get to determine how you're going to prioritize those, your choices for your district based on where you are in that science of reading journey. If I'm in cohort 3 and I'm just getting started, I may want to just start with a state contract and look for our state to work on makeups and turnover. If I'm a small district or if I'm a large district, I may have other options. So we wanted to make sure that you understood there's different places that these funds can be used for. Okay, and so we're going to share this presentation with you. We have included the memo as a link, as a resource. You should have a couple of different memos. There's an overview of PRC085 that we just talked about. There's also the chart of accounts and where you can find that. The chart of accounts has been updated on the NCDPI website as an additional reference should you need that, but we've also linked it in this presentation for later. It's located on the website under working documents for the FY 2021-22 school year. So for my team, I know I've done a quick overview, that we've done memos, and I wanted to make sure that we were here to answer some of your questions. Any other burning pieces that I've left out or we need clarification on for the panel who's currently with us?
Whenever you and Dan are ready, there's a couple questions from the chat. I would just like to read out loud and see if we can answer.
Dan, anything specific to preschool that I have not noted yet?
Have to find the unmute button. The only thing, Amy, and you may have mentioned this, but just to, if so, I'm just going to reiterate that there are also funds to support, separate funds to support that substitute teacher reimbursement or funding for pre-K teachers, NC pre-K teachers to attend the letters training. That teachers that are in private childcare settings and Head Start settings that are not operated by public schools that are NC pre-K funded. Those funds were not sent to the district. They will be sent in the very near future. We're working with DHHS. They'll be sent to the local NC pre-K contract administrating agency to disperse to those private childcare sites.
And if you're just joining us, just a reminder, what we wanted to do today was start with just an overview of what you have seen. A lot of this you have seen in the memos, but just to clarify some of those pieces. But then the rest of this we were treating more so like office hours so that we can begin to answer your questions. Please know if there are questions that we don't know the answer to, we're going to go back and get those answers. This is why we felt like it was really important to go ahead and open this up to the field to make sure that we understand what questions you do have and make sure we've considered all of those scenarios and things that you're trying to work through as you're starting to build those literacy intervention plans. So with that, I'm going to have Kelly and Tanya go ahead and start going through some of the questions for us, and that's what we're going to do from here on out.
Okay. And some of the questions I'd answered, and I even copied and pasted from the memo, Dan, some of that information you just shared around the non-public school sites as well. So are the sign-in bonuses for the summer camps mandatory?
So that is mentioned in legislation, and we can go back and get clarification specifically, but that's part of the recruiting that is mentioned in legislation as part of your interventions.
So our Read to Achieve summer camp is scheduled for July. How can we use those funds for signing bonuses if we haven't started camp yet?
So the purpose of the recruiting bonus is for you to start recruiting teachers in advance prior to camps. It's the performance bonus you'll look at after July 1. But right now, so I know many of you are starting your camps maybe in July, but that is something to entice to have people sign up. Now, you may have tons of people who are willing to sign up anyway, but keep in mind districts around you, if they give signing bonuses, we're seeing a lot of this with or hearing a lot of this now is this district's paying a bonus for attending letters and district's not. So just remember if to think about that when you're also signing up and recruiting teachers for reading camps.
So for the performance bonuses for summer camps, will the funding come earlier in the fiscal year next year, or will it be again next spring before that money is available?
This money will come earlier next year. Since this was new legislation, we had to work through all those processes, and that's what's taken a little bit longer. And the budget wasn't approved until November. So that was the biggest holdup.
I think you addressed some of this in the coaching model, but I'll just make sure to ask it. Is there any way to get more trainers for North Carolina because it can't be cost efficient for the state for all counties to have to pay for trainers or pay them?
We are currently working with some of our advocates to create a budget to show what it would cost for the state to have at least one facilitator per district so that we can align our processes. So that, anyway, we're advocating for that. How's that? I can't give you a solid answer on it, but that is something we have thought about because it would be to our advantage to have that.
So clarification around the subs and stipends. Someone is asking, their understanding was that those stipends were paid to teachers if we were having them during the live sessions, right? And, or after school or weekends for the stipends. But they've been doing theirs on work days, so they don't have to use that funds. So do all those participants get that money anyway, or what happens to those funds that we don't use for subs or stipends?
So it is my understanding, and we're building this as we go, but it is my understanding. If you, number one, you have to follow the budget and the finance rules. You cannot double pay a teacher. If they are working on a work day and they're in training, you cannot pay them a stipend for already being on the clock. So that would be one of the things to consider. However, one thing you can look at that might be to your advantage is if you don't spend all those funds for your subs and stipends, it's still in the PRC085 funding allocations. Therefore, it might be that you use those for something different in your literacy intervention plans. So if you have leftovers after you've paid subs and stipends, that's still aligned to that chart of accounts in PRC085. The main point for that formula is so that you knew what to pay for your subs and stipends for those teachers. And so that was consistent across the state. So if there are extra funds left so that you don't just revert those funds June 30th, those can be spent in anything that aligns to the PRC 085 allocation chart.
Can we use PRC 085 funds to pay for Orton Gillingham training that has already occurred? We only have until July to spend. Can we go back to last July or when we received the notification?
So I'd have to check on that, Tanya. That's not one I'm not sure about that one. And Tanya's capturing the questions that we might not have the answers to. So we can get back with you on that.
Do Read to Achieve summer reading camps have to serve grade 1?
It's in legislation, but however,
It's optional.
It's optional this
It's
year,
optional.
correct. We are providing funds so that if you would like to include them, you may, but it is optional. We just didn't want to cut you off at the knees the first year and not have you prepared to support those children, realizing what's happening with the pandemic.
So for Cohort I schools, y'all have some great questions. Y'all are out of the box thinkers. For Cohort I schools, can we reimburse district funds that we have used to purchase letters for staff not included in the state contract?
I'm going to defer to Dan. Ask that question again. I'm going to listen.
Yeah,
Okay.
yes, yeah,
Okay.
same here. Yeah, please.
Okay, so for Cohort I schools, can they reimburse their district funds that we have used to purchase letters for staff not included in the state contract? So can they use 085 funds to reimburse themselves where they had to pay for some of their district staff to attend letters that were not in the contract for the state?
That's a great.
Yeah, so all right, so I'm gonna kind of flip that around a little bit, I think. So for example, if it's the subs and stipends funding, right, and they had a lot of their trainings on teacher work days, and so they didn't use that funding for that, you know, training additional staff for sustainability of science of reading is allowable as part of a literacy intervention plan, right? So the answer to that question would be, in that case, would be yes,
In this fiscal year.
in this fiscal year. Yeah.
Mhm.
Can you clarify again about pre-K? If the NC pre-K is half in district schools and half out of district schools, each group got funds?
Yes, so because of the way that NC Pre-K is implemented statewide, you know, a little less than half of the local contracting agencies are public schools, and then the rest are primarily Smart Start, local partnerships for children. There are a few also Head Start grantees that are NC Pre-K contracting agencies, but because you know, more than half are not public schools, for those sites that are located, NC Pre-K sites located in a private child care center or a Head Start site not operated by the public schools, those substitute funds will go to the NC Pre-K contracting agency, which for 44 or so contracting agencies, those are also the public schools, right? But that funding will be received separately if that's the case, outside of the 085 allotment. If it's the local partnership for children, the local Smart Start, then Smart Start will receive those funds for the private pre-K sites, private NC pre-K sites, and they will distribute those funds to those sites. Did that answer the question?
We'll see in a minute, Dan.
It's clear as mud, right?
That's right. When does PRC 085 have to be encumbered and spent?
It will revert as June 30th.
So just for clarification, the allotment number we received on the letter is exactly $165 per teacher per unit session they attend. How are we to cover matching benefits?
Great question. We may have
That
to
is a
find
good
out from
question.
finance. Yeah.
Yeah.
May have to find out from
So
finance because finance game. Go ahead. Oh, Dan, you may know, but
when we worked with finance, the original number that we had actually started with was 125, and when we worked with finance, they actually bumped it up to 165, so that at least, you know, based on the information they had as far as maximum sub reimbursements, that would hopefully cover, at least for most people, the benefits as well.
Can we use some
Or
of
not
the
the benefits, but the you know, the taxes and things. Yeah.
Can we use some of the funds for stipends and subs to allow for on-site training, such as sub coverage for PLC debriefs?
so according to be clear, the stipend itself is written such that it covers the 6-hour session, the 165. However, if you start looking at chart of accounts, you can use these funds for bonuses. You can reallocate these funds. If you notice that you only had to pay for one session for your teachers at the 165, the money that you have left over can be spent on anything that is related to science of reading professional development for bonuses and such within this fiscal year. So if you just have to, but I would be very careful in the language that I use for a stipend for a PLC as opposed to a bonus. So watch that language because that you cannot double pay a teacher. You can't pay a teacher twice for the same during the work hours.
Okay, so I think I can answer this one. For letters training going forward, what will the process and cost be if the district has a trained facilitator for ongoing sustainability? And we want to make sure we include the online platform, the online course as well. So we are working on a state list of pricing that we're going to send out to every letter's point of contact. So you'll have your price list for North Carolina that's going to give you several pieces of pricing information. You'll know what it costs to have a trained facilitator, what the materials for the facilitator costs. You'll also know what it costs to purchase the online platform for new teachers or anyone new taking the course, as well as the actual physical materials that you will receive when they go through training. So we are working on a master price list for North Carolina that we're getting from Voyager Sopris. And when we have that, we're going to add it to a folder that is specifically for letters point of contact. So you'll have that information as you get ready to plan. That's going to be happening much, much more sooner than later. So very soon. And I do want to speak to, while I have all of you on here thinking about facilitator training, I do want to just point out a piece that some people are aware and some are not aware when it comes to becoming a facilitator for letters. They do have parameters. I'm going to put a link here in the chat where you can go and read those. But it's important to note that when you become a facilitator, you have to have a certain score on a post test. So as teachers or leaders or whomever completes the course, they do units 1, 2, 3, and 4. They take a pre-test before unit 1 and a post-test after unit 4, and that completes volume 1. In order to be a facilitator, you have to score on that post-test an 88 or higher. So let's say you take that post-test and you get an 86. If you score between 80 and 87, you have to pay $49 to be able to do one retake, and then you have to get 88 or above. Let's say you get to the end of unit 4 at the end of volume 1, and you take that post test and you get a 79, you cannot be a facilitator. So you must get between an 80 and an 87 to be able to get to take a retake, and you must get an 88 to be a facilitator. So it's really important to note. And then you have to go through that process again after volume 2. So you'll take a pre-test before unit 5 and then a post-test after unit 8. And the same requirements exist for volume 2. So, you know, people will become trainers for volume 1, facilitators for volume 1, and then a lot of times they're going through volume 2 while they're facilitating, and then they have to go through and take that same post-test at the end and go through the facilitator training. It's a separate facilitator training for volume 2. So I just want to be really clear about, number 1, the scoring, and number 2, you are a facilitator for 2 separate volumes, volume 1, volume 2, the same requirements for both. So I'm going to go ahead and put a link to that site on the website so you can begin to take a look at some of those pieces. Thanks, Amy. All right, let me put that in the chat and then I will get to the next one. So we can use PRC085 to train a pre-K letters trainer.
Yes, you can. If it, you know, if you, again, this year, it's just a practice year for your literacy plans, right? But you can use PRC085 to train a pre-K trainer so that you know, to support your sustainability and ensure that, you know, new pre-K teachers as they're hired can receive the training locally.
If we purchase instructional items for our teachers regarding sound walls, etc., to support letters learning, can this come from the literacy intervention funds?
As long as it's written in the literacy intervention plan. So keep that in mind. It's part of that approval process. If that's your plan, we need to make sure that's written in your literacy intervention plan to be submitted.
And that would go under the core instruction piece if you're specifically thinking about sound walls. Right. There are many hours of work for the letters modules that teachers will engage in outside of the PD sessions. Can the stipend technically be for those online modules, even if the PD sessions are scheduled for work days?
Unfortunately, no. The stipend or sub pay are really only intended to support the teacher in attending a live facilitated session, whether that be virtually or at some point in person, face to face.
And with that said, Dan, we do have other districts who are using other funds, and that's why I mentioned earlier the language bonus to provide bonuses. That's very general. So there are lots of examples out there for that. The sessions are for stipends, the live sessions or virtual sessions. The remainder of that is would be bonuses. Anything outside of that.
If we pay a signing bonus for camps prior to July and a teacher does not work, what happens?
Great question. I'm not sure how that process works, but that's a great question we'll capture for finance. And we'll still keep anything we may not answer here. We'll make sure we keep all these.
And since we're talking about the signing bonuses, there was a question earlier about whether they were required to pay a signing bonus. I don't have access to chat because I'm sharing my screen, but I can. Yeah, in the legislation basically says that the local school administrative unit shall provide a signing bonus. And it says that it's at a minimum of $1,200, but the teacher has to meet certain criteria. There are 3 pieces of criteria that the teacher has to meet in order to receive the signing bonus.
And Crystal Hill was kind enough to put that in the chat for us from the implementation guide, page 65, 66. Yeah.
Yeah, there we go.
Can scroll through your chat and you can see that there or find it in the implementation guide. So thank you. Which PRC is the bonus coming from? So those bonuses come from PRC085.
That's the signing bonus.
Yes.
Later, your performance bonuses will be after this year. So just making sure you know there's a difference.
Right. And you are still getting PRC016 for reading camps. That's all the other reading camp pieces. How do we get approval to use the subs stipends allotment in a different way?
So there's a process with finance that if you have a different or a proposal to add something to the chart of accounts, there's a form that they require. So Roxanne is the person to do that. So you may want to just email me directly and I can work with finance to see if it's allowable.
So the question is, can teachers earn a stipend for completing or mastery of training? So if you're thinking about the completion or mastery certificates that you get at the end of each unit, that's different than the actual course that they take, which is the 6-hour course. That 6-hour course, the stipend is just for the time that they are attending that course if it's outside of their normal work hours. There's no completion or mastery offered for that 6-hour course. That's for each of the unit the unit pieces that you complete along the way. Anyone have anything to add to that in case I missed something there? So the cutoff to spend the funds is what day? June 30th. So the $1,200 bonus would only apply for grades 2 and 3. Is that correct?
Great question. And right now, based on legislation, I'll follow up, but that is correct.
I'm scrolling through on some we've answered through other questions, so thank you for your patience. The email that we received with the PRC $085 amount must be used this year, or is it for next July to June?
This year.
This year.
Right.
Will these questions and answers be put in a doc? So yes, we're gonna take these questions and answers and add them to a PRC, actually FAQ, that Tanya is working on. So we'll make sure these get in that PRC 085 FAQ. And Dan, you are actually recording this as well, correct? Okay.
Yes, I am.
All righty.
And if we've missed any questions as Kelly's going through there, please feel free to cut and paste and add them again at the bottom. I know it keeps moving.
Right.
If she's missed your question, feel free to ask it again.
Highly likely, highly likely.
How soon will the recording be available? Well, the way WebEx has been working for us lately, it's usually pretty great, but for some reason there's been some glitches with it.
Yeah, it should be fairly quickly. But yeah, in case WebEx decides to take forever to save the video. Yeah, it should be quickly.
Yeah, typically it's around a week, no more than 2.
Can bonuses be paid not attached to reading camp, i.e. completion of letters work after hours?
Yeah, so when you look at the chart of accounts, it just says bonus. So that general term that is up to you how to spend that. But remember, the one thing I want to look at is how am I going to budget those funds, looking at all my priorities, and where we want to head as we're starting to build the sustainability plan. If I use all my money for bonuses right now for the work that's happening outside of the day, do I have enough to get started for next year for turnover if something should happen that the state calendar doesn't meet our needs? Or so just think about all of those things, depending on what your district needs.
I do want to say though, the reading bonuses for reading camp, if teachers
Mhm.
meet those 3 criteria, then they must be paid a signing
Correct.
bonus. Yeah.
Correct. That is correct.
We are in cohort 3 and we have received PRC085 funds. Does that money have to be encumbered by June 30th?
Yes. Any PRC 085 funds must be encumbered by June 30th.
And some of those funds, so not all of those funds were for subs and stipend pay for teachers to attend training. Some of those were related to literacy plan and then also twice retained. So everyone should have gotten some funding from
Right.
PRC 085.
Right. And cohort 3 would not have received any funding for subs and stipends. That is just their literacy plans and twice retained. And if you received those, you received an email telling you the exact amount for your twice retained students or the exact amount for your literacy intervention plans. If you were cohort 1 and 2, you received the exact amount for your subs and stipends. Tanya sent the email for a twice retained list of students. So if you did not receive it and you think you should have, just email Tanya Parrish.
And I just want to clarify with Betsy and Ellis, just knowing the names for being in my region. And Betsy, you are spot on with Ellis. Those are those qualifications as far as receiving that. And they would not be eligible unless they had met all of those qualifications, one of which limits them to their grade level because they had to have been given a reading performance bonus. So thank you, Betsy, for helping Ellis. Are LEAs responsible to include sustainability planning for community pre-K as well?
Sorry, ask that one again.
Okay.
Okay, he's got it.
Yeah, go ahead. Well, yeah, I heard it. So here's what we would say. We would encourage LEAs to work with their partners locally, whether that be Smart Start, Head Start, so that and to include them as much as possible. I will say that we do have, as Amy had mentioned previously, we do have currently a couple of Office of Early Learning consultants, as well as there are a couple of DCDEE consultants that are going through that will be going through the facilitator training so we can help support future training for NC pre-K teachers, not just in private childcare, but NC pre-K teachers in general, and pre-K teachers in general. And so, but we always encourage local collaboration and for districts and other programs serving young children, 4-year-olds. They'll all be in kindergarten next year, right? So we encourage folks to work together and collaborate.
Do we know when the reading camp money is going to drop PRC 016?
We do not have a date yet. We have transferred the funds for them to begin to look at that, but I have not heard a date.
Okay.
Typically, I think they say it's around March, but I'll double check.
Could you clarify the twice retained and third grade student?
Yes, so based on current legislation, a twice retained student is a student who has been retained 2 times in third grade. And that may be that they were retained in third grade once, and then they were a reading retained third grade student the second time. Or they could have been retained twice in third grade, this retention there. So, but it only applies to 2 times in third grade.
And Tanya, you were the one correct. We had another question that sent out the email, correct, with that information around twice retained. So that would have come from Tanya Parrish.
Right. And they were literally like, I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, if you did not receive an email from me, it's because you did not have any twice retained students within Power School according to our list. If you feel like you did have some, contact me and I will follow up on it. But those emails were sent out in January to the students that, to the districts that had students identified in Power School.
And that's what I was going to say there too, is there were only 180 that showed up across the entire state. And some of those were just glitches in Power School where maybe a child was listed as a third grader because they enrolled in a new school and it was an accident. So they had to switch them back to second grade. So you had a few that showed up that way because it's pulled based on just that number. If the child shows up in third grade 2 times in any form or capacity. So it's rare that a child is typically retained twice in the same grade level. So that's why you may not have any, but that's what twice retained is.
Can you revisit the bonus based on the criteria? It would exclude all K2 teachers because they are not able to meet item 2, which is having made a performance bonus prior.
Based on the current legislation, you are correct. However, there are some, I saw in here, there are some teachers, for example, who maybe taught third grade 2 years ago and received a bonus or has high growth based on that, and now they're teaching first grade. They would still be eligible because they do have performance bonuses. You may have a teacher who taught reading camps last year and had high growth. So there's different scenarios. We're working with legal to get a final answer to put out for, actually to communicate to you to make sure that you understand those pieces. But according to legislation, it says specifically who is eligible, and that's what we're going with, currently.
And just for clarification, there's a question in here around performance bonus. Your performance bonus you're going to use with next year's funds, 22-23, because will be at the end of camp, like you stated there for August. The funds that you have to use by June 30th would be the signing bonus. Those funds within PRC085.
Tanya, did you send the email to the RTA contact? Which contact did you send it to?
Yes, it went to the RTA contact for that district.
So just to clarify, Amy, if a teacher was third grade and got a bonus, but now teaching first grade at camp, are they eligible?
Sorry, ask what it.
If a teacher was third and got a bonus or performance bonus, but now they're teaching first grade at camp, are they still eligible for that signing bonus?
If they've received that bonus, yes, like the performance bonus. And it's specifically in legislation, and we can certainly pull that out. I think someone put that in the chat earlier too. One Dr. Hill as well. The requirements of receiving the performance bonus. The signing bonus.
Okay. And Sophia has a great piece of information, a tidbit, Sophia from Union, that she wants to share, that when you're training facilitators, if you're going to train one, you might as well train 10, because you are paying that same cost for them to go. So she just said it's really important to make sure that when you're training like that, to train a lot of folks. Also, just for clarification, the $165 is not per hour, it's per 6-hour course. Okay, and you have a course every unit. There are 4 units in volume 1, 4 units in volume 2. So that stipend, that $165, is for each time they attend a 6-hour course.
And pre-K would have 2 of those 6-hour courses rather than 8 like K5 does.
Are the funds dropped this year just for volume 1 or for all 8, volume 1 and 2?
It'll be for
So
4.
that's a really good, oh, sorry. That's a good question. It just depends really on which cohort you're in. Cohort 1, most districts in Cohort 1 for most of their teachers are able to get the 4 sessions in for K5. Cohort 2 will likely only get 2 sessions in for K5 in the second semester of this year. And then as far as pre-K goes, I believe most, not all. I know there are a few instances where they're waiting. Cohort 2 is waiting for have their pre-K training until August, but for the most part, most folks are training their pre-K teachers in this second semester here of this school year. So all except for a couple of exceptions that I was made aware of, folks have received the funding for pre-K cohorts 1 and 2 to train in this year, both facilitated sessions.
And Carrie, yes, reading camp under RTA is only required for grades 2 and 3 this year. It's optional for grade 1, just to clarify. And so a question here, the allotment. Someone has asked, allotment includes reading camp funds, letters, and twice retained. So it's not all of your reading camp funds. PRC085 is only for the signing bonus and performance bonus funds. Signing bonus this year, performance bonus next year, 22-23. The remaining of your reading camp funds are going to come out of PRC 016, and that has not dropped yet. That money is yet to come. Typically in March, I think you all said earlier.
Typically. And I'm going to clarify, I see some questions about that once again. When we first built the formula for stipends for 165, that was before the rest of the funds for PRC 085 had been decided how that was going to work. Because when the legislation came out, they didn't provide us extra funds for literacy intervention plans, but they said we had to provide funds for literacy intervention plans. So that's where we lumped all of this together. If you're in cohort 1 and 2, and you're not using those funds to reimburse subs and stipends because it didn't happen on days that you had to pay subs, or it didn't happen on after hours where you had to pay stipends, then those funds can be used for anything else in PRC 085. We're not going to pull those back until June 30th. So that gives you an extra option. If you're in cohort 3, you would not have received you would not have received subs and stipends funds, but you would have received some funding for literacy intervention plans to get you started.
Are there funds for principals that did the principal primer course?
No.
Well, that was an easy answer.
Well, I mean, most of those were not. Yeah, that was not included in the PRC information. So, now, unless I would like to know though, if there were principals who did the training outside of the school day, I know they didn't need subs, or they shouldn't have paid subs in their positions. Typically, that's not the case. So, if there's a unique situation, they might want to reach out, but I don't think they were included in that because it said teachers. The teacher.
So there's 2 questions around this. Our sessions are during work days for 3 hours. Can a teacher be paid half of the 165, which is $82.50, for a makeup session that occurs after work hours? So they have a 3-hour makeup that's after work hours.
Sure.
I don't see anything.
Tanya, can charter schools use the money dropped into PRC 036 for sign-on bonuses?
Yes, because 036 is where instead of 085 is for our LEAs, charters funds go into 036. So if they choose to do that during reading camp, then those funds would come from 036.
And you are correct, Paula. Performance bonus will not come out of 085 funding for this year, but the funds you get after July 1st for 22-23. You are correct. Are pre-K teachers who are off-campus sites eligible for bonuses?
So bonuses are not included in the PRC code. So I'm not. So as far as subs and stipends, or a substitute reimbursement or a stipend, the answer would be yes. But those funds are being sent to the NC Pre-K contracting agency. So if they're an NC Pre-K program that's not located in a public school, not operated by the public schools, those funds, there is funding for them to be, to pay for a sub so they can attend the live training, or to pay them a stipend if it's outside, same rules, outside of the school day or in the evening, on a weekend, that sort of thing. But that funding is being sent to the NC Pre-K contract administrator. And if your school district is the NC Pre-K contract administrator, then whoever that person is in the school district, those funds will be directed towards the notification of those funds will be directed towards them. And that will not come from us, it will come from DHHS. And that will occur, it won't be too far in the future. We had to establish some agreements to do a funding transfer between agencies, and we've got that just about in place. And as soon as that's in place, we should be able to move forward with that. I hope that answered your question.
So I'm going to go to Joy Canty's question really quick because she asked it earlier and I missed it and she plopped it in again. So I want to make sure I get it. And any of the rest of you, if I missed something, please type it in again because I'm trying to scroll through and look. Do Read to Achieve teachers have to be on a contract or can it be an EEA?
So legislation says that to teach reading camp, you just have to be a certified teacher that has demonstrated reading, bonuses in the form, with their students. So as long as that teacher is still a certified teacher, licensed certified teacher, they can teach camp. So I know some districts have to recruit retired teachers and stuff because they don't have enough. You can do that as long as they are licensed.
So we've had a lot of talk about bonuses. So let's clarify a couple of things. So PRC085 has two types of bonuses. You've got your signing bonus, which is going to come this year in this year's funds. You have to spend it by June 30th. And then there's also the performance bonus that teachers get at the end of camp when they've taught third graders who have shown growth to proficiency beginning of camp to end of camp. So those are two bonuses. And then Amy was also speaking to some other bonuses because people were asking questions about can we give other bonuses out of the PRC 085? So there's kind of three different things we're talking about. So I just didn't want it to get confused because one of the folks was asking if bonuses are not included in PRC 085, how are we to pay signing bonuses to camp teachers? Signing bonuses are included in 085. Performance bonuses are included in 085. You'll get those after July 1 for after the end of camp. And then there's other bonuses when you have those additional correct leftover funds that you could choose if you write it in your plan as such to use bonuses.
And Kelly, I think the confusion is if someone is saying, I'm going to pay a bonus for my teacher to complete this training outside of the workday, that's stipend. It's really the language, being careful to know the difference between the 165 stipend versus what your district is doing with a bonus. And so that's where we have to be careful to make sure we don't mix that part up. You're receiving a stipend because in legislation, you took this training on a Saturday and it's 165. Now, a district may say, I'm going to use some of these funds for an additional bonus that for performance bonus, a signing bonus, then that's very different. And so I just want to make sure that we're clarifying, make sure that when you are communicating that you're communicating which one that is.
Will Cohort 3 be able to use 085 to pay subs?
Yes, when they start their training next year, they'll receive the same. We'll use the same process to collect the numbers.
Cohort 3, those funds have not dropped yet for you. They'll come in next year.
After July 1, after the training begins, correct.
All righty.
I think, Kelly, I see one, someone is asking about the bonus code and they're saying they don't see a bonus code.
It should be listed in the chart of accounts. Yeah, look and see in the chart of accounts if you see bonus. If you don't, we'll go back and clarify to make sure that's supposed to be there because that was one of the things.
It says extended day. If you're talking about for camps and things, it says extended day bonus. And then there's also the bonus up at the top under regular pay bonus. It should be in both places.
And certainly if not, reach out. And then I saw where Jason had said too, all he's seeing right now currently is twice retained. So Jason, just shoot me an email and we'll follow up. If you're kind of one-offs and you've got some specific things that are happening that don't sound right or match up, feel free to email me as well. I know we have about 3 minutes and I want to make sure we say that to anyone. If you need follow-up questions once you start planning, that's what we're here for. But we knew it could get really confusing if we only did memos, since this is so new. And we wanted to at least start with this. And you providing questions allows for us to determine where we may have some gaps that we need to work on and what we need to do to move forward. So that's the purpose of today's meeting as well. And I see some questions too. Can we use sub money to pay subs for teachers to have time to work on modules and letters? It's very specific as far as when and how you can use the different funds. So if Trina, if you will, just shoot me an email and we can talk about what that might look like.
If the teacher doesn't work the whole camp but qualifies for the bonus, do they get the entire amount?
No, it's based on the amount of time they're going to work.
Yeah, I believe one of the requirements is that you have to work the entire reading camp according to legislation.
For cohort 1, will new teachers for next year that have been recently hired or are hired during the summer be under the state contract to start next year with Unit 1?
That will be up to each district. You'll have, as far as cohort 1, when they start, they would not be under the state contract because we're doing the initial training. That's where these PRC085 funds come in. We can provide training at the state level, but as far as materials and license, that would come out of PRC085 funds after July 1 for part of that transition and sustainability plan. And so, but we'll still offer those trainings. Now, if you decide you're going to take all of your teachers through it and you want to license directly with Lexia Voyager-Sopris, then you can also choose that as an option as well.
There are questions around, continue to be questions around clarifying, second and third grade teachers for the signing bonus and all that. I'm going to put a direct link to the implementation guide in here in the page number that you can find it, where it really outlines those stipulations, because they have to have received a performance bonus prior. That's why you're kind of seeing in the chat this conversation around it being third grade teachers only and K1 and 2 not getting that same opportunity. So I'm going to link that for you here in the chat.
And what we'll do is we'll take these questions and we'll work on FAQs. We'll also add updated items to where maybe we didn't answer something today into that FAQ to get back to you as quickly as possible. Working with the different divisions that may have these answers. I know it's 4:30 and I want to respect time, but this has helped tremendously. And what we can do, ladies, and Dan, is also link the implementation guide back into the memo that's going out this week. Because that's where a lot of these answers come directly from legislation. So you have a chance to go back through that. If you still have access to that, certainly look to that implementation guide as well. Sometimes it's a little each section. If you're in section 3, that's coming directly from section 3 in the legislation. So if you want to compare the two, that will help you as well. So you'll have that direct language. But thank you for your time today. We will be back in touch. We appreciate all of your feedback. Appreciate the opportunity today to be able to answer some of your questions rather than just putting it in a memo. And thank you for all that you do.